Welcome to the Ezra Digital 2022 Education Series. The Electronic Signature and Records Association was formed to educate and advocate for the use and acceptance of digital signatures, records, and transactions. Ezra members are dedicated to providing, promoting, and participating in Ezra values, which are expertise, leadership, collaboration, accessibility, and technology neutrality. As part of Ezra's educational mission, this is our third annual education series. The intention of the series is to provide insight and practical guidance on the business, technology, and legal implementation issues that arise across a wide spectrum of use cases. Although eSign was enacted over 20 years ago, there is still a learning curve as companies continue to transform their business practices. These issues have been of increased importance during this time of social distance, remote work, and contactless consumer engagement. We hope that you will find these webinars useful. I would now like to turn the program over to Cinnamon Rogers with DocuSign to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Mallory. Welcome, everyone. My name is Cinnamon Rogers, Head of Global Government Affairs at DocuSign. DocuSign helps organizations connect and automate how they prepare, sign, act on, and manage agreements. As part of the DocuSign Agreement Cloud, DocuSign offers e-signature, the world's #1 way to sign electronically on practically any device from almost anywhere at any time. Today, over 1 million customers and more than 1 billion users in over 180 countries use the DocuSign Agreement Cloud to accelerate the process of doing business and simplifying people's lives. Thanks for joining us today to learn how digitizing contract management can help legal teams review and approve agreements faster, more transparently, and with less risk. Our speakers today are Doug Luffman, Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for IP, Product and Government Affairs, Celine Beck, Senior Director, Product Management for Contract Lifecycle Management, and Mark Rubenstein, Lead Product Counsel for DocuSign's Contract Lifecycle Management product. Mark, I believe you're going to start us off today.
Thanks, Cinnamon. Thanks, Mallory, for kicking things off. And thanks, everyone, for joining us again to talk about how digitizing contract management processes can help address common pain points that organizations encounter throughout the contract lifecycle. When we talk about the contract lifecycle, we mean anything from creating the initial draft of a contract to negotiating the contract, getting necessary business approvals, signing the agreement, storing the contract, performing obligations contained in the contract, ensuring your counterparty performs its obligations, managing contract renewals, and so forth. Really, the entire end-to-end contract process. Despite contracts really forming the backbone of any business, existing software tools don't adequately address contract management. So most organizations remain stuck with highly manual processes. As you see on this slide, when DocuSign asked legal departments what their current priorities were, lawyers responded that they prioritize the need for a centralized repository to more easily store and retrieve contracts, the ability to better respond to new and changing regulations, reducing the amount of time it takes to negotiate contracts to resolution, improved internal collaboration, presumably both with other lawyers in their department and others across the organization, increased impact on the business, and near and dear to our hearts, digitizing contract processes to improve efficiency. I don't think any of these responses will surprise anyone who has ever worked in or with a legal department as part of their job. Companies often have multiple repositories for storing contracts that are scattered across the organization, each with their own complex folder structures. And this can make it really difficult to locate a given contract, let alone properly manage obligations and business risks within the contract, or perhaps even more importantly, uncover business opportunities. As for better responding to regulatory changes, My guess is that many of the companies that make up the 43% we see on this slide have spent the past 4 years trying to keep pace with European privacy regulations, most notably the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, which in many cases requires specific contract terms to be written into customer and vendor contracts to achieve compliance with the regulation. Various compliance frameworks related to the GDPR that allowed companies to transfer personal information from Europe to the US were put in place, and then they were invalidated by European regulators and replaced by new frameworks, which were then also invalidated and replaced with new programs. And each new framework required a different contractual approach and different terms to be placed into customer and vendor contracts to remain compliant. So for companies with little visibility into their own contracts, keeping pace here was at best a huge burden and at worst impossible. As for faster contract resolution, of course, everyone wants contracts to get done faster. That's universal. There's no sales representative who has worked with a prospect for the past 6 months who wants to get stuck in a prolonged contract negotiation into which the sales representative might have very little visibility. And no lawyer negotiating an agreement wants to be considered an unnecessary blocker to closing new revenue. Increased impact on the business. Legal teams now more than ever are asked to be strategic partners to the business and are asked to develop long-term strategies that support an organization's broader business objectives. We no longer see legal teams measured solely by how much they can reduce outside counsel spend and litigation costs. But in order to increase business impact, legal teams really need to speak the language of the business and become more data-driven, both to provide strategic insights to the business and to more easily demonstrate the impact of the work being done by the legal team. Of course, the best way for legal teams to increase their impact on the business is for lawyers to spend more of their time on higher value strategic work and less time on everything else. Better internal collaboration. This is a close cousin to increased business impact. For legal teams to really be strategic partners and help champion innovation at their organization, legal teams have to become more effective collaborators with business and build out workflows and communication channels to drive this collaboration. This is particularly critical during contract negotiations, where collaboration with other departments and other internal subject matter experts is now almost always necessary to finalize contract terms and obtain necessary business approvals. And finally, digitizing processes to improve efficiency can positively impact all of the areas highlighted on this slide, including enabling the sort of cross-functional collaboration and harvesting of strategic insights that can be used to transform inefficient manual processes. Cinnamon, could you please move to the next slide? So if so many legal departments identify the same strategic priorities, what's keeping them from advancing these priorities? And as you see here, the challenges that legal departments face and the priorities we just discussed are really tightly aligned. And finding a way to overcome these challenges in many ways is the priority. The challenges highlighted here are information silos, inefficient manual processes, and having to manage risk without slowing down the business. Information silos within an organization, including decentralized systems for contract storage and disconnected inconsistent manual processes across departments limit the ability to collaborate, they reduce efficiency, they create barriers to accessing data and insights that allow legal teams to provide greater strategic value. And all of this is happening in a context where legal teams are being asked to do more with reduced budgets and resources, and to protect the company, yes, but protect the company without slowing down the business. Next slide, please.
Hey, Mark,
Go
Doug,
ahead.
I'm just chiming in. If we can go back one slide,
Sure.
I think some additional takeaways from this, starting with kind of the priorities for the legal department and the challenges, is we've also been observing that legal being a business partner and specifically providing business value is something that we're seeing more and more of. I mean, we lean in with that value prop all the time within our legal department, and we're seeing a lot of our colleagues as well, is that it's avoiding the situation of being perceived as the cost center and basically the loss leader, basically just being just fixed services, but rather, as I think Mark, you suggested before, which is being that strategic advisor, not just on legal advice, but also based on the experience that we have in structuring deals, as well as managing the fluidity of all the different regulations that are kind of in flux right now, is really trying to anticipate where things are going and really trying to give as much of reduce the headwinds as well as help with tailwinds with regard to the business. So I think a lot of this is very much aligned with, I think, this evolution of legal departments, as well as the business leaders looking to legal department to really be more than just, you know, scribes or really legal advisors, but also business advisors.
Absolutely, absolutely, well said, Doug. Okay, so the themes we just discussed, they're reflected in DocuSign's research. When we asked in-house lawyers what factors make collaborating across departments difficult, nearly half responded that easy access to existing contracts was an issue, that too much of the contracting process was manual, and that they lacked visibility into review and approval processes of other departments. But what really stands out is that 73% of respondents found their company's contracting processes to be complex or very complex. And so ultimately, organizations have these highly complex contracting processes, but lack the right tools to tackle this complexity. Cinnamon, I believe, onto the next slide, please. And I believe Celine is going to take over.
Yes, thank you, Mark. So now that we heard about some of the priorities and challenges, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to see how we could leverage technology to make, to Mark's point, like the complex more simple, right? And share some of the best practices in embracing digital contract management so that you can deliver value across all the steps of the agreement lifecycle. And some of the priorities that Mark highlighted have become obviously more important and key to address as, in the current situation with a global pandemic. Those priorities in this situation has exacerbated some of those core challenges. Like, for instance, how do we collaborate effectively while we're all working remote? We don't have contacts with customers, with partners, etc. And so it's been amazing, though, that despite uncertainty, many companies have responded very boldly to those new challenges and this new situation they've been facing. And they clearly accelerated automation and digitization in order to act in better and more productive ways. And agreement processes digitization is no exception. So this is an area where we have also observed rapid transformation. And what we've seen is that successful organizations would tend to go through the same steps in the same order in their digital transformation journey. Typically, it would start with the adoption of an e-signature solution as the first step towards being, more paperless, as a way to do business faster, especially again, like is in this anywhere economy. And after starting that digitization process using an e-signature solution, many companies would grow more aware of all of the processes that lead to signature or that immediately follow it, which would also require digitization. Some example would be the preparation of agreements based on templates, multi-party contract review and negotiations, or once the agreement is signed, like the successful handshakes between legal to some of the other departments, like again, delivery, finance, or the procurement team, as well as the effective management of obligations that are captured in the agreement. So the digitization of those processes, amongst other things, can be addressed by a CLM solution, a contract lifecycle management solution, which is a software solution that helps organizations to create, sign, manage, and act on their agreements in a more effective manner across its entire lifecycle. And when you couple your CLM with other supporting legal-oriented solutions, like again, a signature, and you connect them to your business application, this is where you get the benefits of what we call a DocuSign Agreement Cloud, which is again like a system that really sits at the intersection of all of your agreement and business processes and helps you streamline the whole process wall to wall so that you can put the agreements at the center of your business operations, whether it's quote to cash, procure to pay, compliance, etc. And the Agreement Cloud can be augmented by AI capabilities. So we've been talking and investing quite a bit in AI to support agreement lifecycle. So AI has been like a topic that has been, gaining a lot of momentum. It's been discussed for a while. And even though most companies might not be using AI just yet, we've heard from our customers per a recent survey that we commissioned that the vast majority of them plan on using AI for contract management in the foreseeable future. And that most of them felt that having CLM and contract analysis into a single platform was important. And the way we're seeing AI is not like an end in itself, but it's more like as an enabler to our customers' jobs to be done. So it really comes as an aid to drive user productivity, push the envelope in terms of automation, especially for low value repetitive tasks, and to extract additional insight by, again, doing what it's best for, which is really plowing through high volumes of data and extracting, again, like key data points and make that available to users for review. And I mean, just a few examples of how technology can be used in order to drive effectiveness, but could be used to automatically place signature and data sign fields like in your agreements. It could be used to perform more complex tasks like being prepared to adjust to regulatory changes by finding all the contracts in your CLM repository which are impacted by GDPR in just the click of a button, so that you can easily, like Mark mentioned, just try to keep up with evolving regulatory requirements. And all of this really helps at the end of the day to focus on what to do best and help the legal teams to support the business to move faster, better, and with fewer risks. And again, like this is a journey, so you may all be at different points in the journey, and that's totally fine. But no matter where you are, what is important to remember is there's a solution there to support your digital transformation efforts. And what we've seen is that the customers who had the most success with their digital transformation journey really started with a crawl, walk, run approach, and focused first on their immediate pain points and identifying them, trying to revisit the supporting business processes that are impacted by those pain points, and looking at how automation and again digitization can help. And then as you start to reap the benefits of automation and digitization, you can move to the next area to streamline that one. Because at the end of the day, again, it's not about technology, it's really about removing friction, making people more productive, and better supporting the way your business operates. So with this in mind, I'm just going to turn things over to Doug so that we can talk about some of the signs that would show that as a company, you're ready to move to the next level.
Great, thanks, Celine. And sorry, Sim, can we go back to the prior slide just real quick? So with regard to this slide, Celine, one thing that struck me, which I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well as Mark's as well, is that the theme that we've seen is often a lot of companies love to jump into e-signature or jump into contract lifecycle management or jump into something broader with artificial intelligence and agreement cloud. And what, at least in my experience in talking to colleagues, is that it seems that the important thing to start with is, first, you truly need to intimately understand your overall processes. Also, not only understand them, but be able to document them and make them repeatable. And then once you have that, you should be engaging with a vendor, whether it's us or whether it's somebody else, but somebody truly that actually is very knowledgeable around how to then convert their processes into some sort of automated process. The experience that I've had is I've seen many companies that jump into just pick a tool, right? And what they do is they then try to adapt their process to the tool rather than really evaluating whether or not their process that they now better understand actually lines up and is aligned with kind of the tool. Your thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree with you, Doug. And in our experience, it's been exactly that, right? I mean, again, the most successful customers would start by really like sitting down with a partner that has like a lot of experience in deploying those kind of technologies, but really to think through again, what are the points of frictions in their current processes and how things could be streamlined using, again, like workflow orchestration. So to get to that repeatable, auditable, workflow orchestration that you mentioned, and make sure that technology, again, could be an enabler and supporting function to streamline to those new streamlined and newly defined business processes.
I would just like to agree with both of you. I think one of the most important things, and again, emphasize it, is to understand the maturity of your organization in terms of these processes, and then make sure that you implement these sort of solutions in a way that makes sense given the current level of maturity. If you try to go, with a really heavy solution, yet you don't have mature internal processes, it's going to be difficult to succeed. So really sort of looking inward first, making sure the processes are understood and the pain points are understood, and then proceeding to use the CLM solution in a way that helps you solve problems.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's about maturity, but it's also about like your readiness to embrace change, right? Which is why, again, starting small with like a low-hanging fruit, and then utilizing the benefits and the return on investment that you see coming to help justify moving and maybe try to attack a little bit more complex operations or activities within your business is really critical to ensure success.
Totally. And one other thing that I think struck me from this slide, which I think is kind of inferred in this, and we're seeing this actually not just in the use of technology and operations within legal departments, but also actually in government agencies and how they're behaving as well, which is how do you actually convert from a physical world to a digital world? And what are actually the headwinds that are actually stopping you from being able to actually do that? So for example, e-signature, often e-signature is viewed as, it's just a point solution from the standpoint of it's just the actual signing process. But in fact, what e-signature typically is light workflow on the front end to be able to actually start with maybe a template, changing that digital template into an agreement, then negotiating that agreement, and then ultimately getting to the point of having it approved or reviewed and then signed. And so it's a really nice lightweight way of kind of an entry, kind of a gateway technology into the overall kind of agreement cloud type of vision. The second one is, I think we're seeing it in a trend from the standpoint of remote online notary around the country right now in the US, in that it's usually the title companies that are actually really, really pushing for remote online notary. And the reason is because they see that remote online notarization is that one point where you have to go from the digital world back into the physical world, sign something or notarize something, and then scan it and then bring it back into the digital world. And so what we're seeing, that just as being one example, is around the world, is this trend of really trying to figure out where are those points in your processes or where are those points in regulations and the laws and the like, where basically there are headwinds from being able to have the end-to-end digital process. And once that's resolved, that's one of the reasons why we have such a great kind of government affairs team that's actually really leaning in, of working with the legal community, working with industry as well, and working with public sector, is to understand where are those points where there's that breakdown, and really trying to smooth it over. And I think legal departments overall should be looking at it both internally as well as with regard to their overall business as to where there might be other opportunities doing it, and then just leaning in and engaging with companies like us where we're willing to kind of collaborate, as well as others in industry groups such as like Ezra, to really figure out how can we really smooth it out to really make this thing much more efficient. So with that, why don't we switch to the next slide, and why don't we touch on, how do you go from kind of that initial entry point into the ecosystem with e-signature, which is, templates, light workflow, electronic signing, and then you ultimately have a fraud evident type of document, into how do you know that you're ready to move beyond that? And so as Celine suggested earlier, let's talk about what contract lifecycle management is, or CLM for short. I thought the Forrester definition on the right was actually a good definition. Again, it might be obvious to a lot, but often people think of different things like matter management systems or document repositories as contract lifecycle management software. So let's at least kind of first double click on what is a contract lifecycle management service. So first, it's software that basically helps a company or an entity to basically create, negotiate, manage basically specific contracts and help with the compliance and help with the overall management of it. I think many of us have thought of the image of the physical world where once you have a contract, you get it signed, it's a hard copy, you stick it into a physical filing cabinet, and then you just kind of wipe your hands of it and say, we're done. And then it sits there until there's a problem, then you pull it out. Well, what contract lifecycle management is starting to really push towards, and I think that's part of that theme or upfront that we were talking about legal departments looking to be more of a business partner as well, and not just from the standpoint of collaborating, but also being able to add and enhance kind of the business value to the overall company, is recognizing that agreements have a lot of additional value embedded within it. And the question is, how do you manage it? And then how do you unlock it? And so the point of going from an electronic signing solution to something broader, such as a CLM solution, we thought that these were kind of three interesting stats. The first is when you start seeing the lack of visibility into process and documents, it probably suggests that you probably had a light digital workflow, but now it's probably time to start building out something a little bit more robust as to having decision logic associated with it and the like, as well as how do you actually find the documents? Is it just searching it, or now you need to add metadata to characterize the documents, and then you need to add obligation management reminders to understand how to follow up on different documents, or there's an incident that happens and you need to know what are your notice obligations, both regulatory, as Mark suggested, or even contractual and the like. And so it's not a surprise that over nearly 3/4 of the respondents really said that it takes more than 10 minutes to locate a single contract, and that is not a big deal in just one agreement. But then when you start magnifying and saying, what, I have an incident, now I got to review hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of agreements to understand what that item or that obligation is, it then becomes very, very problematic. The second one that I thought was actually interesting was contract drafting is overly complex and too manual. We see this time and time again, in that how often have we seen that basically two parties have redlining, and basically what it is you throw your standard template over the fence to the other side basically completely bloodies it with red lines of their template. It then comes back to you, and then this goes back and forth 5, 10, 15 times iterations, and you make some progress, but it's ultimately kind of this very inefficient process. Then, of course, then the business leaders start rolling their eyes and really seeing it as basically a legal headwind more than anything else. And so what the CLM type of solutions provide is really this ability to kind of tackle that additional element as well, which is what are the type of historical inefficiencies, documenting with metrics, and then better understanding, potentially how to kind of crack the nut of how do you make it more efficient. So again, that's not a surprise that actually is the highest respondents as it relates to, how do you reduce more than an hour of your work creating new contracts? Everything from finding the right template or finding the right document to start with that aligns with the business objectives, to the actual negotiating, to the actual then finalizing of it. And then the last one is on the review and approval of, basically multiple departments. And as we saw from the desire of not only the law department, but companies wanting to collaborate much more effectively with one another, especially in this kind of remote world we're in, there's also this element of how do you have the tools in order for people to centralize around a single source of truth as it relates to what you're working on, the tools to actually then be able to effectively communicate, whether it is embedding comments into documents and making sure that they don't show up on the other side of the negotiation of internal comments that are confidential to the one you're negotiating with, or more generally, just how do you efficiently identify the right stakeholders in order to engage? Again, not a surprise that nearly half the respondents said that, the review and approval process. So once you start seeing these things becoming more and more important to you, or it seems to be actually magnifying based on the volume you have, it really probably is time to go from something that is helping you digitize your process to something that's actually helping you manage the agreements much more so. So let me pause there. Mark or Celine, any additional thoughts or comments on this?
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting that 88% of overly complex contract drafting processes, it's interesting to think what's going on at the rest of the organization while the legal team is going back and forth, like you said, maybe 10 times. You have red lines going back and forth maybe 10 times. The rest of the organization doesn't necessarily see that complexity, or they don't have insight into what's going on. And that causes a lot of heartburn and a lot of hand wringing and wasted motion. And, frankly, even possibly tension between departments. And ideally, a contract management solution will be able to help provide more visibility to the rest of the business as to what's going on during this complex contracting process, which we also hope to smooth out through a CLM solution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just like, actually, I think it's a nice segue to the next slide, because some of the main drivers actually, and the main business outcome that customers adopting like a solution like a CLM solution wants to reap is really like to increase the speed of doing business, right? And avoid like all of those bottlenecks that are really like slowing you down and conducting business. So they want to be able to reduce contract cycle time. They want to leverage automation, like to really get rid of manual processes that are, really error prone, right? And that, put your company or expose your company to bigger risk, and ensure again consistent, repeatable, and auditable processes across the board, so that you could again drive business more consistently and also maintain compliance, governance, etc. I think at the end of the day, and especially in those times, right, it really comes with the realization that we're asking legal departments to do a lot more with, with not more means or not more support. And at the end of the day, the solution like that really helps you through digitization and automation to get people back some valuable time so that they can focus on high value activities and really help the business move forward. And so as you'll see in the next few slides, by visiting some of the key business processes and connecting again the business to the business activities with the underlying agreement processes, you can reap some significant benefits, and you can help your business constituent run their business better, faster, and again with fewer risks. So this is probably again like the like speed is probably like the most sought after business value. What we saw also is like as you're starting to adopt like solutions like e-signature and you're really starting to embrace digitization, like you're going to see like a dramatic increase in the number of contracts which are being processed per department over year. And so, and again, like the pressure to respond faster and faster just keep piling up. The growing complexity also of the demands that are placed upon the legal department also goes crescendo. And so again, like a lot of organizations that are successful in their digitization efforts will start by streamlining their business processes like quote to cash or procure to pay, but soon will realize that this needs to be done again in conjunction with their contracting system to be really effective. And here too, again, the recommendation is really to adopt a crawl, walk, run approach. Standardize first like simple things like sales contract that don't necessarily require legal or finance intervention first. try to make sellers more autonomous in the preparation of agreements or procurement through a combination of smart rules, agreement, document generation capabilities, etc., so that you can, again, like make sure to free up legal resources for more important and more complex contract drafting. And then you can start automating those too, like, the agreements that must be reviewed. You can leverage, again, like a CLM solution, and ideally integrate that with your supporting enterprise apps. In the case of quote to cash, you could actually, make sure that you have in place workflows that where the sellers could initiate, the proposals and contracts directly from the opportunity in a CRM solution like Salesforce. Make sure that the right data is pulled in the agreement, and then automatically submit those contracts to the right people within your legal department for review with a single click. So again, making sure that the agreements are drafted effectively, that the right information is there, limiting errors, and then making sure that the right agreements based on their type, based on the total contract value, is actually assigned to the right legal resource is critical, and helps to really significantly reduce contract cycle times. And workflow orchestration is obviously key here to ensure that you have, again, this really consistent and with fewer errors in the way process in place. But you also need to account for some level of flexibility, especially during the contract review and approval cycle, as the nature of that requires usually interactions with multiple stakeholder, and collaboration, especially like in a remote setup, is typically more organic and fluid, could sometimes even be chaotic. And so you need, in order to drive better internal collaboration, to make room for that more, again, like organic type of interactions. So just make sure that, whatever solution you adopt enables you to, brings the best of both worlds by combining in the discipline of workflow orchestration with ad hoc collaboration capabilities and task assignments, so that people can get together quickly, comment, get to resolution, and then edit the agreement to get going before sharing with third party. Anything you wanted to add, like maybe in your experience, Doug and Mark, in this?
Well, I think it leads into the second slide as well. One thing that I think legal departments or just companies need to keep in mind as well is that contracts are not just legal instruments, but rather are business representations of business relationships. And so first is making sure that the CLM solution or whatever type of process you have really are aligned with your internal processes, as well as that the vendor or the technology you're using, the ones that are actually developing it, really get what you're trying to achieve. Because I think all too often what you have are people that are developing things in a vacuum and providing a tool that may not have even been initially been a contract lifecycle management tool or electronic signing tool or a workflow tool, but rather was something else that they've now repurposed into this market. And so I think it is important to ensure that those that you engage with really truly have the vision. And I also think that we're seeing an element of a trend here with regard to the operation piece, which I think leads into this one as well, which is we're seeing like clock and other types of legal operations organizations forming. I mean, 20 years ago, you didn't really hear about legal operations people within legal departments. And I think what we're now seeing is, because of the huge volume and the huge impact that reducing the inefficiencies has on a legal department's resources, it's becoming greater and more important, not just from the standpoint of really focused on processes, but also making sure that those processes are very relevant to the way that you operate day to day going forward. So just a couple of initial thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that, so we talked about the notion of speed, which is like very important. But obviously the other aspect, I think, is about like extracting more value out of the agreements. And so this is how you can essentially leverage, again, technology to really operationalize agreement at scale and really tap into the wealth of information that is contained in your agreements to enforce obligations, to drive better relationships with suppliers and partners, etc., and make sure that obligations are fulfilled and managed adequately. So I think one of the key value, and this ties back to spending inordinate amount of time locating agreements. I mean, with a CLM solution, there's no more searching, people searching their email inbox, looking for the last email with a contract attachment and having to make sure this is the right one. You have a central location, which is your single source of truth that now becomes searchable, right? And once your agreements are searchable within that centralized repository, then you can start building reports and dashboards that can help you better assess your portfolio level risks and view trends, again, like across agreement types, so that you can, again, continuously enforce improvements and get better at what you're doing. And then here, just to note, like we talked a little bit about AI, but AI can play a significant role there by, again, allowing you to surface more relevant search results and accessing key contract data while lightening the load on the legal team, really. So one of our customers in the high-tech space, for instance, they have used AI to respond more quickly and effectively to contract-related questions and requests. So people came to the legal team saying, hey, I need this information. And, the person who asked the question really anticipated this process would take a long time, a couple of weeks maybe. But now, like, they can just come back like in the very same email very quickly and saying, hey, here's the information you requested, and here is actually what you need in order to get going with your business operation. So again, very critical to be able to begin tap into the information that you have in your agreements, again, to support the business and your business constituents. And if we can move to the
I'm
sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I think it's worth again emphasizing the point. I mean, this sort of crawl, walk, run approach. Some of the things that we keep mentioning, like having a centralized repository for contracts, or as it's mentioned on this slide, monitoring renewals, right? So that you don't inadvertently forget to provide notice of non-renewal on a huge contract and owe money on something you're not using. These things they're pretty elementary, right? But they provide huge value. And so I think just getting started on the process has such huge value. You don't have to have a huge amount of AI, combing through all your systems on day one. But just centralizing contracts, understanding what's in them, as opposed to what Doug said earlier, working for 6 months hard to negotiate an agreement, and then throwing it in a drawer and no one knows obligations or opportunities. I just wanted to emphasize that again.
Yeah, I think one other element before you go to the next slide is you mentioned kind of AI, and I think often people think it's kind of the magic magic potion that's going to solve all the world's ills. And I think the way that at least I personally look at it is artificial intelligence, machine learning, as well as all the other types of tools that you would have in a system like this, really has a fundamental purpose, which is it's to elevate or to raise information that you personally need to the forefront, so then you can act on it, or vice versa, reacting to an incident outside and then figuring out how to react to it based on your contractual obligations internally. And so whether we call it AI or we're talking about reports, or we're talking about dashboards, we're talking about metrics, I think it all is within this same kind of theme and trend, which is look for something that actually elevates all the information that you need. And there may be information that you don't know you need that actually over time you realize that it's actually tracking that information to then be able to raise it. And so it helps you operationally be more efficient. I agree speed is important, but I think it's also efficiency, right? Some things just take a long time to do. So the question is just, are you using your resources efficiently to, as quickly as possible, get to where you need to be? And I think the digital workflow type of functionality you see in a lot of these types of systems, and then the ability to elevate a lot of the underlying obligations or rights and the like is something critically important.
Yes, absolutely.
The AI is is meant to help the contract professional or the lawyer do their job better. It's an assistant as opposed to just wholly doing the job itself. That's not how it works, right? So it allows the lawyer to focus on higher value tasks.
Absolutely, it's an enabling technology for our users. And so this is probably like the third big theme and benefit. Like when you get increased digitization, automation of manual tasks, the creation of templates and the template library that you can effectively manage, workflow orchestration. I mean, all of that really contribute to fewer risk, better governance, and at the end, like to help you maintain compliance. So it gives you more control over what terms and conditions end up in your agreements, who has authority to review, approve, who has permission even like to see and access those agreements in the first place. So this is all about like making sure that you have again control and visibility. It also helps to make sure your legal resources can focus on high value activities, consistent metadata that can be identified and captured manually, of course, but like, Doug pointed out, like maybe using technology like AI suggested by AI so that you can just like, that just speeds up the process of identifying like, parties or key dates in an agreement, automated alerts and notification, making the agreements more searchable and actionable. At the end of the day, it's all about providing you and surfacing the right information, the right context, and help liberate legal teams from, again, those low value repetitive tasks so that they can focus on substantive issues like compliance management, addressing value leakage, or other ways to add tremendous value to the organization. And then also a great tool like to be prepared to not only like do the day-to-day, but also be prepared to face the unexpected, like a pandemic situation, for instance, or like Mark pointed out earlier, like to keep up with regulatory changes. So this is all about like helping you rapidly identify key data points, obligations, impacted agreements, so that you can respond more swiftly and adequately to rapidly changing business context. And so if we move to the last slide, we're going to finish here with a quote. So again, like the intent here, and I really like this quote by our customers, Genesis, which is like a high-tech player in the customer experience space. But essentially, they embraced, obviously over time, like they followed that journey map that we saw like earlier in the slide deck, and started with e-signature and then moved to CLM and finally embraced AI as a mechanism to really supercharge their CLM offering. And it really opened up like a lot of new opportunities, as you can read on the slide. And again, like we like to think of AI and contract analytics as levers really to push the limits in terms of predictive intelligence, recommendations, really delivering this assisted user experience to help you be more productive and have like better visibility into critical information. So it's not like something on its own. Again, like it's more as an enabling mechanism to supercharge our customers' key jobs and day-to-day activities. So we're really obviously super excited as customers are embarking on their digital transformation to see that, and to see that it really never ends, that as you reach, higher levels of maturity, as you embrace like the next level of tools and process changes, that will allow you to continue to look beyond the basics and use more innovative solutions to continuously improve the way that you manage your business, the way that you handle business continuity, the way you manage risk, and really help you uncover new opportunities like Genesis and help you maximize contract value. And on that note, I think we're now happy to open things up for Q&A if there are any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Celine, Doug, and Mark. Yes, if anyone is interested in asking a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat. And I'm happy to kick us off. So not sure who is best to answer this question, but what's the ramp up or implementation time associated with a CLM solution? Is there a lot of change management required?
I can handle that, Cinnamon, and then maybe if Doug and Mark want to add to it. But so, I mean, I can speak for DocuSign, obviously, but our standard CLM implementation usually take around like 3 months, which is, you know, probably one of the fastest like implementation time in the industry. I think what's most important really, like when you select like a CLM solution, is really to choose also like the right partner, right? You need a good partner to really work with you on understanding your the current lay of the land, establish like the scope, define the project timeline in advance, and really help you navigate change management. Because I think, like we pointed out during the presentation, it's not about the technology, it's really about like being ready to embrace the changes that will derive from, you know, digitization and automation. So I think it's as important like to select like the right partner, the partner that has a vision, that has the right supporting technology to get and embark on that journey. And so all the investment that you will put up front with that partner to really, again, like have this lay of the land and identify like the success criteria and where you want to get, and also maybe put together like what are the key milestones, which are the low-hanging fruits that you want to attack first before moving to the next phases, is really critical. And all that upfront investment is really worth the effort in the long run, and that will augment your chances of success and the successful rollout of your CLM solution.
Thanks, Celine. And just one last question, sort of following up on that, you know, considering legal teams do have limited tech budgets, you know, how can those folks best justify an investment in this type of solution? I don't know if that's best for Celine or Doug.
I mean,
well, I'll chime in. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I mean, in our experience, essentially, I think like the way to position this is that a good contract lifecycle solution would be like an enterprise solution, not a departmental solution. So not just for legal. So like what we're seeing is that the budget doesn't need to come exclusively from legal. Usually there will be like business partners like in different departments that will also chip in. And then, you know, obviously we can help evaluate the ROI and the expected like business value that you'll reap from leveraging a CLM investment to help build the business case internally.
Yeah, and as a follow-up to that, again, I think this is where companies and specifically the business stakeholders or legal departments should really look to tech vendors to really help them with that journey. And I think it's on a couple of points. One is, I think it's absolutely appropriate for not just to say, hey, what is the ROI? And you get some random statistic, but say, hey, look, have you done studies on this? What are some of the data points with regard to your current customer base? And I think this comes back to the trust spread, right? Is go to somebody that you know is reliable and is going to be around for years to come, you know, preferably obviously a public company, but really just somebody that actually has a robust experience in this. The second piece is, I think, is that the legal department should not be looked at as having all the answers, in that it basically is a collaborative discussion between the legal department or the business group, as well as the tech vendor, as relates to not just the capabilities within the product, but also what are best practices, and really being able to lean in on a vendor that actually knows what best practices are and are in touch with the legal industry, is in touch with basically their customer base as to what works and what doesn't work, has a robust professional services team that can do this. And to your point about the 3 months, Celine, I agree with you that is roughly where it is. And sometimes people want an out-of-box solution, but an out-of-box means very limited functionality. And that could be the signature solution for the walk before, or the crawl before walk. But I think in addition to that, there's the element of If you don't tee it up correctly, it could be much, much longer, or if you pick the wrong vendor, it could be much, much longer, because what will ultimately happen is you may get a vendor coming to you and saying, well, what do you want? And the legal department says exactly what they want, but what exactly they want may not be what they need. And so what ultimately happens is you have professional service teams or consultants coming in, building something that is not, well, is exactly what was asked for, but is not really what the legal department needs, as they convert from a physical process to a digital process. And then ultimately you find 6 months later that what was ultimately built is not what you want. So again, I think it's that important collaboration, relying upon basically someone that you can trust from the standpoint of the vendor, and really kind of a dialogue between the various different stakeholders.
Great.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry. I agree with everything you said, Doug and Celine. And again, just want to emphasize, it's a journey, right? That it's a journey, it's a process. And again, you want to work with a partner who really understands the use case and business needs, and who's going to be there to, hold your hand throughout the process.
Great. Thanks so much, Mark, Doug, Celine, and thanks so much to Ezra for giving us an opportunity to present today. And with that, I will turn the program back over to Mallory at Ezra.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Cinnamon, for moderating today. Thank you to Celine, Doug, and Mark for sharing such valuable information and content with the Ezra audience. A quick overview of the broad spectrum of public policy issues that Ezra is currently addressing. So our focuses this year are going to be on e-notary and RON and what that legislative landscape looks like. There's been a lot of temporary and permanent measures over the last couple of years. We are going to continue to focus on e-sign and any of those changes and updates happening. And then lastly, continuing to focus on e-titling and public policy in that arena. The Public Policy Committee meets the third Thursday of each month and is limited to Ezra members. If you are interested in participating, please email me, mallory.smith@esignrecords.org for more details. We have a lot more great content coming up in the education series this year. You can find out more about Ezra in the series on Ezra's website at esignrecords.org. On behalf of Ezra and DocuSign, thank you for joining us today.